Good. All right. Good morning. I know we got about 30 seconds or so, but it's good enough for a group of people, so I just want to kick it off. Obviously, to me, when I looked at this, when I wrote this and I wrote that on there, I assumed everybody in the military is going to look at me like, why is this industry guy going to tell us operational requirements? So I really do hope that this prodded a good conversation. We only got 20 minutes, so I don't expect for us to have it a lot right here live, but please grab me over here and then beat me up right afterwards. I will try to go a little quick so we can have some little Q&A, so I like discussion more than anything. So a little bit about me, Patrick Perry. I've been with my company for about 2.5 years. Before that, I did 22 years in the Army, so I have a little experience with the stuff. I got to serve in really cool organizations, doing a lot of different things, and more importantly, work with some really good people. So while I might not have really good answers, I at least got a lot of failures behind me that usually I can help and share with people, and then people can probably hopefully learn from my mistakes. So the goal really here is to kind of talk about the operational requirements, give some perspectives on how military operational requirements really are close to the civilian world, the commercial world, whatever you want to call it, and it's not that different. But the biggest thing that you kind of really have to change is the way to go after the problem when it comes to zero trust. Zero trust is not a solution to a problem, it's a strategy against a new approach. And therefore, you kind of have to look at it differently. I think a lot of us, especially over the time, spending, overseas and that kind of stuff, we get very, very focused on solving the problem instead of, again, kind of leaning back up and focus more on what is the situation and the strategy in the environment that we might have to shift. I'm not going to really talk much about policy. Everybody knows policy is a big problem. We're going to have to change that. That's on you guys, not me. I'm going to, I just give good ideas. I was a warrant officer, so that's all I did in my Army career too. But we'll be focused mainly on just kind of, again, analogies, different examples and scenarios and that kind of stuff. So again, to kind of think a little bit different. So to kick it off, I like to kick off, talking about just shifting the mindset. When you think about zero trust, or you think about something that's really, really different in how you're going to approach security now in the IT cyber environment, you got to shift the mindset. We've kind of been in this do loop of constant optimization and improvement. We got an operational environment that we need to constantly maintain and then improve where we can, when we can. We got all these other problems to solve. So usually, the whole adage is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. We don't have time for it, focus on this. But now that we're really kind of trying to redesign the security architecture to what they're, referencing in the world as zero trust, we kind of have to change that mindset from an optimization improvement to a transformation. I think Secretary of Army McConville, maybe, a couple years ago at an AFCEA conference, even made a big spill about it. He doesn't need incremental change anymore. He needs innovation. He needs transformation. So I like analogies. So I want to compare puzzles and Legos. I'm also a geek, so I like Legos. But to me, they're really good, visual representation of the different mindsets. The first thing is that, puzzles are really kind of boxed in. They have their edge pieces, they have their fixed pieces. You can, you really can't put them anywhere else, but you can, if you bought another puzzle, you can replace it with a cleaner one or that kind of stuff. But they still have fixed positions, which means your mindset is kind of boxed in, while Legos don't. Legos can be snapped all together. They can expand left and right. You can add a whole bunch more and all that kind of stuff. It's just a whole new approach at building something and getting after it. The other idea is piece by piece. Lego pieces, again, are very form-fitting. Or not Lego, sorry, puzzle pieces are very form-fitting. They fit into a spot, and that's really their only spot. So you can pick and replace this thing with a new one that you went and bought, but it's really not going to change anything. While Legos, they come in different shapes, sizes, colors, but they all still work together. So you can combine, if you want a really big piece, you can use one big piece to represent 3 small pieces, or vice versa. But the Lego mentality of, again, piece by piece approach is just a different way that you can construct things. And then finally, the whole interlocking and combining things, which kind of double down on the whole piece by piece things, is that instead of looking at things in their own silos and they only do this one thing, I'm going to do it really good and then I will make sure it works with these other things, is everything was built to work together. And if it doesn't actually start that way. So to bring all that back to the zero trust stuff is, zero trust, in my opinion, I call it all the time, is like defense in depth 2.0. A lot of the things outlined in zero trust that you need to kind of get after and you're trying to achieve is really everything you're trying to do in defense in depth. The biggest difference, though, is defense in depth was looked at a lot more as we did security at every layer, whether it's OSI model, whether it's user to application level, whatever. but you did security focus on protecting it as a individual object, not as a system. It wasn't a system security architecture. To me, Zero Trust, one of the biggest things that's changing is everything is supposed to be built in a way to only work optimally together. So, I think Eliyahu Goldratt wrote a book called The Goal. It actually spawned the book, The Phoenix Project. Most people have read The Phoenix Project or The Unicorn Project, but it all came from The Goal. And the system thinking is that, again, you're still only as good as your weakest link. So you can optimize every little piece of the system you want, but your weakest link is really where the construct is. So I like to then shift over to the operational requirement thing. And this is where, again, I expect you guys to take a lot of notes, beat the shit out of me, beat the poop out of me, and just a little bit. So what I really like to make sure to focus in military planning is that we have some very core fundamental aspects that we just can't get around. This is what makes us really different than like the commercial world. So military culture, we already talked about it. We can't change policies. You're not going to change military culture too fast. But how can we still work a new, again, transformational idea back within the culture? But a couple things is just as examples of things that you just can't not discount is command and control and area of operations. It's embedded in all leadership. It's embedded in everything we do in the military. And therefore, if you don't directly account for all aspects of that when you're, again, going after this new transformational thing, you're going to get a lot of friction. And I've seen it more and more often when it comes to, again, a lot of solution development. But in the commercial world, it's really not that much different. You have things like command and control. You have big businesses that own little businesses. They have to work together all the time. They work in these different areas of operation, and they have to connect. They do mergers and acquisitions where, again, they are bringing in new company and are trying to get everybody to work as optimal, as fast as possible, because that's where revenue comes from. So there is a lot of that out there. It's just a different approach, but they put a lot of resources to it. In command and control specifically, one of the things I always try to say is you can have the most awesome stuff in the world, and have a great contract in the world, but if it conflicts in any way with command authority, then you're really getting nowhere, because the command authority will always overstep that. And I've watched it with EITAS kind of contracts at different organizations that I worked in, and in the end, everybody wants to get the mission done, but an SLA-based contract isn't always built on that. So that's a major friction point that I've seen constantly because of that command and control aspect of military culture. So, but besides that, there's a few things that you have to account for, in this IT cyber domain. It's not really hard, really complicated. I think this picture captures a few of it, and this is really only tactical focused. But then when you're trying to do something transformation, how do you account for something that big and complex? And decomposing all those little parts so you can at least find the things that separate them, or combines them, like transport or form factor, power requirements, all these other kind of things, is essential in those, again, operational requirements. You don't have to nearly say as often now, hey, I need to make sure that I block 443 at these locations. No, I need to make sure I have this. Don't break these kind of limits. So how you decompose those kind of parts is really complicated. And in all honesty, there's nothing like this in the commercial world. There's a lot of OT. Everybody knows that IoT, OT is a big thing. So it's kind of like this, but it's not as complex as this. They just don't use the spectrum the same as people in the military. So this is one of the things that really kind of separates the military from a lot of everybody else. But then finally, how do we kind of align these things into manageable chunks in the unified network? That's their approach is, hey, we got these strategic levels. By the way, I took all these pictures from, documents on the web. I did not create any of this stuff. I'm not that good. So, but the whole goal is, again, we're going to align these things, make it more manageable so it's consumable so we can action. Because the last thing you want to do is get into like this analysis, paralysis by analysis approach, because it's so overwhelming. I think the unified network approach is a really good approach to that. They got some separation and that kind of stuff. But this is where Zero Trust was really kind of coming in, is how does it fit into this? It's really easy to just say, Zero Trust. We're going to Zero Trust everything. I don't trust anything. I'm just going to, make it Zero Trust. But how do we actually still work within all these different parts, all these dynamics in that last picture across all these different, atmospherics and still come at it at this transformational approach? And then again, that's where we, some people talk about, I think Jeremy Costner said it yesterday at his talk, is that, the network needs to be the security approach needs to be much more of an overlay to the environment. Transport agnostic is a really big term. Like back in the day, we used to just say as long as it was IP based, it didn't care about the transport. But today we still realize that when you still start fitting security into that IP layer, you're making problems for yourself. You're creating friction. So how do you just kind of overlay, almost like an area of operation, for connections of users to applications dynamically just kind of bolted on based on the mission and that commander's requirements, and doesn't really need to worry about the network and that kind of stuff too. Think of it as like, how Century or all the big ISPs out there kind of work, where, you don't worry about how AT&T might get your connection over to, Verizon or something like that. You just know it's going to work. They are paid to make all that stuff work. What you care about is your overlay to it. And that's where we're kind of getting to with this zero trust architecture and where we're going at, next. So I'm sure everybody's aware, they just released last month the Zero Trust Reference Architecture 2.0. Great document. I think it's about 104 pages. Has a lot of really good examples. It allows you to really kind of conceptualize what they're getting after. But I wanted to focus on just this section that they recently added. And the reason why I like this section a little, quite a bit, honestly, is because it kind of just gives you those, the bumper rails. Hey, is the approach, is my strategy, is my solution kind of getting after this stuff? Yes or no, almost. Does it do this? So if you look at it like, principle 4, dynamic assessment of the user and the device constantly. If it's not really doing that, then it's not really zero trust. You can call it zero trust. We constantly like to say, hey, I got tasked to do this. Hey, how can I change what I'm doing slightly to make it meet that? So I can just say I did it. And this is kind of those guidelines. A lot of things can't work like that. Another one is, I think it's number 5. 5 is all about now, hey, how are we keeping data secure at all times at an encryption level, not just a segmentation level, which is a big shift. I was a network guy. I worked in networks for a long time. And one of the big things that we always did was just separate network traffic all the time. We're like, hey, we're good. We made separations with bursts or VLANs or pick your freaking separation approach. That was no problem. But now it's calling out something more, encryption at every level. And the reason why that matters so much is because of principle 1, where it says there's no such thing as a perimeter anymore. There's no such thing as like, hey, everything on my outside of this, I don't trust, so you have to encrypt it. But as long as you're on the inside, you don't have to encrypt it anymore. Again, if you built stuff in the enterprise environments on garrisons or bases anywhere, it's the same concept that we did with SIPR networks and stuff. If it's inside our building, we can just skip the whole building and don't need PDS. But if it's not, then you got to PDS it everywhere, all the way down to all the way almost to the terminal. Well, that's basically what this is saying. Now all sensitive data, and it's not classified sensitive data, this is unclassed sensitive data, has to be encrypted at all times, both in transit and at rest, which is a major shift. But it's one of those fundamental things now you can look at and say, is my approach really meeting these principles or not? And if it's not, then you're not really meeting zero trust. You're kind of just rewording what you're doing. So how do we get there to a transformational approach? Again, we can always keep doing what we've been doing in the sense of like, hey, I'm going to buy the newest capabilities. I think the term that we would always use, best of class. I need capabilities that do these kind of things. I'm going to go for best of class. Each one of these categories, and then I'm going to bolt them together and make them work. I used to make fun of it all the time. I know API is like the big buzzword. Everything has to be API based and all that kind of stuff. All we ever worked on was layer 3 API. If it had an IP address, I can make it work together, and that was it. But over time, we've noticed the more you bolt on, really all you're doing is creating more bottlenecks, and your problems can move between them. You spend more time troubleshooting, maintaining, and that kind of stuff than actually getting better or even delivering a capability that's really good user experience. And that's what it's really going after. When you think about a transformational thing, it's about the user being effective. And that user has to be effective. Therefore, in the industry term now, it's UX. What is the user's experience? And that's what everything centralizes around. It's no different out in the military. We don't call it UX, of course. We just call it, just doing your damn job. So, but in the end, that's really what we want to get to. I mean, how many times has everybody been deployed or something, and you had somebody say, hey, why can't this stuff work like it does at my house? I got Comcast, I can get to anything like this. And it's like, tap dancing, solar flares, all that kind of stuff. But in the end, it all just comes down to is because the architecture outgrew itself. So the approach for transformation is, again, how do I build an ecosystem or a platform approach that can accommodate not just now, and I hate the term future-proof, but get as close to future-proof as possible and predict or be ahead of something to where instead of me saying, oh crap, I need a new capability, let's call it sandbox. I need that new capability because it's the only way that I can get after problem X. well, I got to re-architect everything a little bit because, again, it's going to take me, 12 IPs that I need to add to it. I got to add, 200 gigs capacity of that stuff, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to get into all that. But in the end, you're re-architecting stuff. When you go to an ecosystem and a platform play, you're clicking a toggle switch. That's why developers have all shifted to the cloud, because they don't have to go do a lot of work to get working again. They just turn things on and pay for what they need. So that is why it's so important to kind of look at things more as a platform approach and an ecosystem approach when you think about zero trust and this transformational approach than just trying to, again, buy a bunch of stuff, try to make it Frankenstein and work like you want it to do. So we'll break it down a little bit, aligned to the zero trust pillars. So you guys are all probably familiar. They've had them out there for a while. I don't like to say that there's 7 pillars because, to me, 2 of them actually cross all of them. So I just call it 5 plus 2 because I think that's another military term everybody loves to say. Hey, we got 4 operations plus 2. What do you mean plus 2? That's 6 operations. No, we're only calling it 4 plus 2 because that's all we're funded and equipped and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, so we'll start off with, again, the core stuff. I know data's a pillar, but in the end, data's everywhere. It crosses all the pillars. So it's one of those things to me that I just kind of group it into the services one. And in the end, you have an ecosystem of service providers, hybrid, on-prem, off-prem, all that kind of stuff. Infrastructure as service, SaaS, and that kind of stuff. So getting after, making sure they all snap in and that you can optimize the usage of that has to be part of that security architecture. Furthermore, identity. There's no way everybody in here has not heard the term identity as zero trust now. So everybody knows how important identity and ICAM is to the whole approach to zero trust. And again, that constant credentialing, getting after attribute-based access, not just willy-nilly. I logged into the domain controller, I can do whatever I want now, and then hopefully I'll block you somewhere else, but really get after, again, very, very small attributes and that kind of stuff. Endpoint management and securities. It is 2 different things, but in the end, it's still on the endpoint. That's, I think, is a kind of a big shift. We really didn't. I know we have stuff like HBSS and a few other security tools and that kind of stuff, but we never really looked at it as part of an ecosystem of stuff. It was this isolated solution. It would solve certain problems, and it would have an effect on people that didn't actually do the right thing on updates and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't part of that greater ecosystem. Finally, there's the transport. Obviously, everything to get a user or a sensor to the shooter or the endpoint, you have to have a transport. It's the one thing that doesn't change. It's always there, but it's also the one thing that probably introduces the most constraints in your planning. Whether it's DDIL kind of thoughts or, it's just, interfaces, spectrum, purchasing, all that kind of stuff. But it's probably the most dynamic one. And then security operations. We've been doing, SOC kind of stuff for quite a while, but again, it's usually kind of an overwatching thing. It's not an integrated, an automated thing, which then ties in capabilities like, orchestration and all that kind of stuff. So when you get the whole +2, you kind of see how orchestration should be across everything. That's why it's so, I know I'm abusing the term API there. I use it like 15 times, I think, on there. But in the end, when you just break it down to its simplest, term that you can just easily use, everything should be connecting at a much deeper product level than just an IP interface. That's the kind of mindset that you kind of have to look at so you can really get after this transformational, platform-based kind of approach. Sorry, missed a slide there. So we'll walk through kind of a little scenario to just, again, war game. I'm a big whiteboard kind of person. I like to do whiteboarding based on scenarios, not based on hypotheticals, because hypotheticals don't introduce the proper variables like constraints, planning factors, mission command, all that kind of stuff. So we'll try to kind of simplify it with this picture, and this approach, just as an example of how the platform or an ecosystem would all work together for a transaction. So we'll start with the user. Zero trust, one of the big things is there's no such thing as a on-prem environment or off-prem environment anymore. So like it says on the bottom, it's any user, any device from anywhere. That should always be your starting point when you're thinking about what is my zero trust approach. Then that next point is, again, what am I trying to go to and what's that first step to that user? And it should be the credentialing part. This is where, again, identity has to work right within. Now, you already have transport, but probably everybody here has probably read NIST 207. They really break down, the policy enforcement point and decision point, where again everything is being done away from the capability that you're trying to get to, and with all this orchestrated policy. So you're already getting credentialed and asked, and again you can add MFA, you can add all this kind of stuff that you want at that point, but that's where the policy enforcement point starts. Then hey, where are you going? And what's the risk? Again, that security assessment. Not all connections need the same amount of security. This gets back to that user experience goal. How can I apply appropriate security for the session, not just all security on every session? It's got to be form-fitted. And again, that's not very easy to do. So you have to look at it from a different approach. Then it's, are you carrying bad things? This is where, everybody knows one of the worst things that you have to account for is stuff that's been hidden in payloads. So are you getting into payloads at scale? When you think about the biggest risk right now, and I think the stat is like 83% of traffic now on the internet is encrypted, and 90-something% of all bad things are in encrypted traffic. So if you're not breaking encryption traffic at scale, which is a very, very hard thing to do, you're not going to get after the number one problem. You're really kind of shying away from the problem and hope that you don't get hit. And that hasn't worked out for a lot of people. And then finally, hey, establish the connection. Policy enforcement points checks all those things before it connects you to the service. So, and again, a SaaS is a really good example, as an environment that you don't have very much control over. It's being ran by everybody else. That security over there is really outside your control. So you've got to balance security everywhere else in the rest of your ecosystem to get after it. That service layer pillar is really outside of your control. Finally, let's do another really quick example. The same kind of thing. I'll click through it faster to something that you do control. And this is one of the big risks that you have to do is you have to remove the threat of attacking the service, because a service that's just sitting out there is exposed, and we're only talking about unclass. So the exposed service is an attackable thing, whether it's DDoS or whether it's just trying to break the credentialing service and just bypass the SAML. I think the golden ticket or something is like the funny word that everybody likes to use. But get past all that by just going straight at the service to attack it. You have to remove that kind of attack service. I'm out of time, so I got to really fly through this. I apologize. You can talk right out here, like I said. And what I'll leave right there is just the bottom line is when you're looking at, again, how can I differentiate a zero trust based approach versus just another security approach that's being called zero trust, is you got to find some kind of characteristics that differentiate. We're offering a few right here, where again, certain capabilities can't do these things. Fundamentally, they weren't built to do it because it wasn't the design 10 years ago. And they've been building against something for so long, so they can't shift it. But newer architecture, new modern approaches, new platform-based approaches have been accounting for this for years. This isn't a new problem. Zero trust has, I think, been around for 16 years now when it was first being taught. It's just being slowly evolving into what it is, into this ecosystem play and platform-based approach. So again, I do apologize for having to rush the end. I got a little too excited on a couple things. So again, Patrick Perry, I work at Zscaler, so I'm in one of the booths somewhere over there. I'm just standing around here, but if you got any questions or, again, we want to kind of talk about it a little bit more, please just grab the big beard. I'll be standing right over here, and I really appreciate it. Oh. I got to get out of here quick, so I think you're on. So I apologize.
That's fine. Thanks.
Yep.
Did a good job.